Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Ryan Wells and this is the Blue Line Optics YouTube channel. Today we are going to go over another rifle scope review with the Athlon Optics Neos Rifle Scope, or the Neos line of rifle scope. So the Neos line of rifle scope is a hunting scope, and there are actually a bunch of different variations that you can get in this line. It comes in 3 different magnifications, 3 to 9 magnification with a 40mm objective lens, 4 to 12 magnification with a 40mm objective lens, and a 6 to 18 magnification with a 44mm objective lens. And with those you can choose between a BDC 500 illuminated reticle, a Center X reticle, and a BDC 22 rimfire reticle. The illuminated reticle is not available on all models though, or not on all the magnifications, so just so you know that up in advance. But since it has such a diverse selection of models and reticles and magnification selection, this is actually becoming a really popular hunting scope out there. It's priced really well. Hunters really like it because it actually has quite a few features and it's pretty high quality considering what you can get it for. For instance, this is the one that we're reviewing today is the 4 to 12 magnification with a 40mm objective lens and the Center X reticle. And this costs retail $129.99, so it's really good. And we're going to go over all the specific features in the feature score, but just so you kind of get a really brief overview of it, it has the side parallax adjustment, or the side focus parallax adjustment, plus fully multi-coated lenses, capped windage turrets, windage and elevation turrets, I should say, and all that plus the general overall quality of the scope tends to make it extremely popular with people, so we wanted to go ahead and do a nice little overview of the scope here and obviously take it through the tests, see what the data brings back, and just kind of see what type of a scope it is. So I'm really excited for it. I've actually owned this specific model for over a year now, so we're really going to be able to test, like, you know, not just how it is right when you take it out of the package, but also how's it going to hold up for you down the line. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it here. Now remember, with the feature score is we end up holding the optic up next to something that's really high quality on the market that has all the features that you would that you would really want to have in a high quality rifle scope. So for instance, the standard that we're using is the Vortex Razor HD Gen 2, the 4.5 to 27 by 56mm FFP scope. Okay, and to give you a little bit of background, the Razor HD Gen 2 we actually just finished a review on, and it actually ended up setting the bar a little bit higher for these features and stuff like that. So when we compare something like the Neos against that, which the Neos is 100 and like the most that the Neos could cost is $159.99. The Vortex Razor HD is a $1999.99. At least the model that we reviewed anyway. Some of them can go up to $2,500. When you're reviewing two optics like that, you would expect one to completely blow the other out of the water, right? And it's not that it doesn't necessarily do that. It's just that the Neos ends up surprising you with how many features it does end up having compared to the Vortex Razor HD Gen 2. Now, that is not me saying that this is Vortex Razor HD Gen 2 quality. Absolutely not. They're completely different scopes, meant for completely different reasons, and they get in. The score for the Neos is quite a bit less than what the Razor HD Gen 2 is. That being said, for a scope that costs $130, it holds up pretty well. So for instance, it doesn't have the 34mm tube diameter. It's got a 1-inch tube diameter. That being said, the total elevation adjustment is 60 MOA and the total windage adjustment is 60 MOA as well. That's pretty good. That's really good for a 1-inch tube diameter scope. So we end up giving it points for that, and I still give it a point on the tube diameter just because it has that kind of adjustment. If the total elevation and windage adjustment would have been a lot less, say 30 to 40 MOA or something like that, then we'd probably consider just giving it 0 points for the 34mm tube diameter or standard, which the Vortex Razor HD Gen 2 set up, considering it has a 1-inch. But since it actually does have those elevation and windage adjustments, I think that deserves really at least a point there. Now with the 56mm objective lens that the Razor HD Gen 2 has, the one that I reviewed, the Neos model I reviewed, has a 40mm objective lens. You can also get it in 44mm objective lens, so I gave it a point for that just because it's not like an incredibly tiny objective lens. I mean, the one that I did, it's a little bit small. That being said, it didn't really affect it when it came to the optical quality scores you're going to see here in a little bit. and you can get a bigger one with the 44mm objective lens. So we gave it a 1 out of 2 points for that. ED glass, it doesn't necessarily have ED glass, but that being said, it ended up getting a really high quality optical quality score, so I gave it a point for that as well. It does have illuminated reticle capability. It's got an etched glass reticle. It doesn't have edge-to-edge clarity, and honestly that's really rare when it comes to scopes anyway. The Razor HD Gen 2 does have edge-to-edge clarity, along with something like the Cronus BTR that'll have edge-to-edge clarity too, but it got 0 out of 2 points for that. First focal plane scope, it's not a first focal plane scope, so it obviously didn't get the most points out of that. And a little caveat there is that we don't I completely understand that some people like the second focal plane scope even better, and actually people who are looking at the Neos are probably going to be in the market of folks that are looking for a second focal plane scope anyway. It tends to be more hunters and not necessarily extreme long range shooters that are looking at getting a first focal plane scope versus a second focal plane scope. That being said, we still have to have the standard to which we grade it on, so I don't give it points because it has a second focal plane scope. That's just how it is. That being said, if you're looking into buying the Neos for hunting reasons, you probably don't really care about it having a first focal plane. You're probably fine with the second focal plane, and that's probably going to be okay with you. So more power to you, man. Advanced fully multi-coated optics, gave it a perfect score out of that because it has advanced fully multi-coated optics. Doesn't have extra coating to protect the lenses from scratches or anything like that, so we didn't give it any points for there. And then we come to the capped windage and elevation turrets. That comes into effect when you're considering the total overall score of the scope, because you want to make sure that if you have a capped windage and elevation turret, that's actually going to hold up for you out there. And I mean, if you look at the scope, it's extremely high quality. You're not going to have any problem if you make an adjustment on your elevation knob or anything like that, and then lock it up with the cap turret. I don't think you're going to have any problem with it holding the adjustment that you made for it. And so with turret tracking, the Neos got a really, really good score, especially for a scope that I've had for over a year. So it's kind of seen its fair share of use by now. It did not go outside of a 1% error at any point in time, and it did not average outside of 1% error at any point in time. And that's typically what we want to see in a scope, especially, or not especially, but even a scope that's priced the way that the Neos is. So that was really good. I was really impressed by that. It considering how the price that it did. The average off was 0.65 MOA, and that's just the average out of all of it being off, right? And remember now, the way that we end up scoring this is we score it by total inches that the scope would be off at 1,000 yards, 500 yards, 200 yards, 100 yards, and 50 yards. And so when you add up all those inches based off of the average off and the confidence interval that you want that you want to be able to have, knowing that it's going to be off, meaning you're confident that it is tracking correctly. Even if it's going to be off, you're confident that it's going to be off by a certain amount. You end up getting about 16 inches off, which gives it an 83.62 out of 100 for the total possible points when it comes to inches off. Now, that does not mean that it has a 16% tracking error. So keep that in mind, please. That does not mean that it has a 16% tracking error. That just means that at 1,000 yards, 500 yards, 200 yards, 100 yards, and 50 yards, it will be off by about 16.381 inches. If you take that average inches off and the confidence interval, and you extrapolate that out into total inches that the scope would be off at those points. And then you take that out of 100 so that we can compare it comparatively to other scopes. So for instance, the Vortex Razor HD Gen 2 ended up only being off by about 3.5 inches over that entire span. So if you want a comparison, that's kind of what it compares to. And the what that ends up doing is that ends up giving us an 84% for a tracking score for the Neos, which I think is extremely good for a scope that costs $160. So overall, it's tracking like a B scope, which at $160 max that you're going to pay for this, the one that I paid for is $130. That's a really good tracking score in my opinion. So with that said, let's go ahead and take a look at the optical quality score. So for optical quality, we had to make the same adjustments that we had to make for the Midas HMR, and I scored it the same exact way that we scored the Midas HMR, which means that we obviously took off the 24x measurements at the 100 and 200 yards because it only goes up to 12x, or to 12x, 12 magnification. We didn't factor those into the score because it couldn't hit that. It just couldn't hit that range. So when you consider that that it can't go up to that range, and you kind of just take that out of the equation altogether, the lens clarity for the Neos is actually extremely good for the price point. It ended up getting a 146 out of 181, and that's right around an 82% for the scope altogether, which is just like, it's a solid B, which is kind of what we're seeing, you know, like with the feature score, the tracking score, and the optical quality score. It's looking like it's going to be a B scope, or scored as a B scope, and for the price, I think that's really, really good. The max yardage we got out to before we couldn't read the top line on the Snell and I chart, or the top resolution line on the USAF 1951, was 400 yards, which is right around where we got with the Midas HMR. So that's really good to know, actually, because the Midas HMR actually has better glass in it than the Neos. And I think what we're seeing there is that the ability to see at those long distances has much more to do with the with that extra magnification. I think if you had that extra magnification on this scope and on the Midas HMR, it would have gotten out to a farther distance, and thus would have gotten probably a better optical quality score. But just go ahead and keep that in mind. It got the final score for the optical quality score on the Neos was a 146 out of 181. So the final score on the Neos, it ends up getting a 287.62 points out of 355 total, which is an 81.02%, giving it a B. And I think that really describes the Neos, actually, is it's a solid B scope, considering these tests are putting it up against things that are extremely high quality, like a Vortex Razor HD, an Athlon Aries ETR, et cetera, like the US Optics B10, which we're doing this coming week. When you're considering that those are the types of scopes that the Neos is going up against, I think it performed extremely well. If this was just a hunting test or a hunting scope test, and I think I mentioned this in the Talos BTR review, if this was just a hunting scope test like the Talos BTR, I think it would have gotten a higher score. I think it would have honestly probably been around an A-, because we would have been comparing it to the features you would normally expect on a hunting scope. For instance, like a hunting scope isn't going to have most of the features that the Vortex Razor HD Gen 2 has. That tends to be more along the lines of an extreme long range scope that you're looking to maybe just hit steel or hit targets at maybe 1,000 yards or something like that. But as far as a hunting scope goes, I would put it at a really high B, maybe even a low A. That being said, we can't alter the tests just because that leads to inconsistencies and inaccuracies. So overall, a B scope, and I think that's very fair. And so that wraps up the Athlon Neos Rifle Scope review. If you got any questions, leave them below. Be sure to follow us on YouTube so that you can get updated on all of our new releases. We release content almost 2 or 3 times a week usually, and it's usually just a review about an equipment, about scopes, about spotting scopes, binoculars, and stuff like that too. Also, if you head to the website, you get 12% off your first order. Just go to bluelineoptics.com/shop and use the code OPTICS12 at checkout. You get 12% off your first order, whatever it is, and the entire order. So other than that, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next time.